Welcome to Research in Brief. I'm Ryan Johnson from World at Work. I'm in the studio today with Deloitte Consulting consultants, Greg Stoskopf and Sheila Sever, and we're going to talk about a recent survey that was a partnership with Deloitte Consulting and World at Work called Salary Structure Policies and Practices. And Greg, really, this most recent survey that we conducted and released in the fall of 2012 had great response. More than 900 World at Work members responded, so we've got some fantastic data that we're going to cover in this video segment, but it really came out of an article that you had authored in 2002, and I want to make sure I get that right. Choosing the best salary structure for your organization turned out to be one of the very best, most popular articles in our database in the last 10 years, so we decided to update the data related to that article, which we are doing here. But let's get into the data. The first part talks about the types of salary structures that organizations are using, and what did we learn from the survey, Greg?
We had four types of structures: market-based structures, traditional structures, broadbands, and step structures that were surveyed. And what we found is that 64% of the participants in the survey said they're using market-based structures. And that was followed by 23% that are using traditional structures, 12% that are using broadbands, and 8% that are using step structures. So market-based structures were really far and away the most common type of structure being implemented and used in organizations today.
And let's talk about definitions, since you mentioned these four types, and I just want to make it clear for the viewer. We've had some conversation in social media about what did we mean in the survey by market-based.
So market-based structures, the way we define them is salary ranges with range spreads of 30 to 80% and midpoint progressions of 10 to 15%. When I wrote the first article, I talked about market-based structures, and I was really thinking about structures that were wide enough to encompass the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile of the market data for the jobs in that grade. So while there is a definition by range spread, I think it's important to keep in mind the purpose of that range spread is to encompass all those different market data points.
Sheila, let's talk about some other definitions that we've mentioned here. A traditional, why don't you go into what those are about?
Sure. The traditional salary structure is really between a 20 and 40% range spread. So rather than the 30% to 80 in a market-based, you've got a little narrower range spreads for traditional. Then the midpoint progressions are just 5 to 10% apart. So you really have more but narrower salary ranges in the traditional structures. Then with broadbands, it's kind of the opposite. You have between 80% and 200% in range spreads, no real defined midpoints, and so it really is kind of the opposite of the two, where market-based really falls somewhere in between. Then step progression is very similar to the traditional in that it has between 20 and 40% range spreads, also has between 5 and 10% between the midpoints, but there are defined points or steps within those structure ranges so that you have a step progression where people are progressing through the range at usually a fairly consistent pace.
Now, the survey also went one step deeper, Sheila, to talk about how organizations vary their use of salary structures. Maybe you can talk about that for a moment.
Only about 37% vary the type of salary structure that they use based on any factor, and the most prevalent response on that was by job level. So for instance, they may have a different type of structure for their hourly workers or a different type of structure for their executives. That was probably the most significant finding, is most folks are using a very similar structure throughout their organization, but if they vary it, it's typically on job level. And usually market-based is still the most prevalent, no matter where you're looking, but coming in as a second to that with the hourly production workers, we tended to see use more of step structures and traditional. With the executives, we saw broadbands as well as traditional, and then with the other non-exempt, the professionals, supervisors, and management, it was really traditional, followed quite distantly by broadbands.
Greg, what did we learn about how organizations roll out salary structures globally through the survey?
What we saw on the global front was that most organizations are using grades rather than bands, although there is a desire to and a practice of having a global grade for the organization and the job.
Greg, this is the first time World at Work and Deloitte have done this survey. We talked about your article that you wrote. But clearly, salary structures are probably here to stay. What do you see in terms of trends until we update the survey again in another year or two?
I think we're going to continue to see a lot of organizations using market-based structures over the next several years. One reason is the flexibility they provide, the ability to encompass several different market data points, and that gives organizations flexibility to bring people in where they need to and to pay them where they need to. I think you're also going to see a continuing desire to keep salary ranges very connected to the market and the way that it's moving, and the market-based structures allow organizations to do just that.
The final thing, Sheila, and obviously the whole survey will be available at the World at Work website, that I want to ask about are the tools that the practitioner said they're using here. Apparently we still have a lot of Excel jockeys out there.
We do indeed. I think anybody who's been in compensation for any period of time absolutely knows and loves Excel. It's readily available. Everybody understands it, can use it, write their formulas. If you send a range structure out to a manager, you know they can open it. They have Excel. If you send it over to recruiters, same thing. So I think we had about 89% of organizations using Excel spreadsheets for designing their range structures. And then another 72% using them for administering pay within the salary structures. So by far and away, the Excel spreadsheet is still the king as far as salary structure design and administration.
Again, the full results of this partnership between World at Work and Deloitte Consulting can be found at worldatwork.org. The name of the survey is Salary Structure, Policies and Practices. I want to thank Greg Stoskopf and Sheila Sever from Deloitte Consulting for Research in Brief. I'm Ryan Johnson from World at Work.